in this blended learning environment that we're going to be facing in the fall. I'm going to be looking at that through kind of two main lenses that I think are really, really important for us to pay attention to, particularly given the uncertainty. So security is one. So how secure is the assessment, and how equitable is the assessment? And both of those things are really important for reasons that I'll get into a little bit later. So the agenda is down there. Should take about an hour total. And I'm hoping to save about 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of this. So like I said, as I'm going, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Quick intros here. My name is Brian McIntosh. I'm a former high school math teacher. I taught in California for a while, and I work as the product manager at EdSite. And I'm here joined in the chat. We're lucky to have her here. Julia Sweeney. Julia, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Totally. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Sweeney. I taught middle school ELA and social studies, and I'm really excited for this session. Brian's got some great slides prepared, and I will be in the chat answering questions as we go through it. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Julia. Just looping back to my agenda here, and then I'll jump right into it. So first, I think it's important to review what we learned this spring, because we did learn some things, and then we'll look ahead at the fall and start looking at how we can evaluate tools for the fall. So I grabbed a few just, easy articles for me to find about assessment this spring in 2020. It has been a crazy time. If you saw me on the camera at the start of this webinar, you saw me wearing a hat because I haven't had a haircut in a very long time. But school has been a very, very mixed bag in terms of what's happening. So one of the stories here is talking about how for AP exams, they actually had to give these at home. Students study for a year for that, and they have to take the test at that point. And there's some difficulty with cheating, bandwidth issues, lots of technical issues that may be familiar to you if you try to do a bunch of distance learning this spring. Interestingly, pretty recently, actually, the College Board has decided that they're not planning to go full speed ahead with letting students take the SAT at home. So they're kind of waiting and seeing what's going to happen in the fall and using that to decide, okay, how do we want to give out this assessment when we'll see what the situation is. And the last piece of this that I think is really adds the urgency and it gives context to the rest of this is that I think rightfully so, a lot of educators were focused on their students' health, both mental and physical, and less so on what learning objectives am I going to hit this spring. And so we know that that creates a very long summer break, and that can exacerbate learning gaps or achievement gaps within a district. So all of this is to say we have a challenge ahead of us. We want to assess, we want to see where students are at, but we know that they're coming in with some challenges. So these sound pretty familiar based on what we were just talking about. So I think it's important for us in this new context to think about what capabilities assessment providers have. And I think going forward, we know that students could be coming in with learning gaps, and going into next year, we have to figure out more about what student learning and assessment is going to look like. So that's the goal for this presentation. That's just kind of giving a little context. Now, I like to go and try and figure out some inspiration in uncertain times. So I look for some quotes about uncertainty, and I like this one. So prepare for the unknown by studying how others in the past have coped with the unforeseeable and the unpredictable. Now, in my role as a product manager, I'm pretty lucky because I get to, the last few months, I've been working at home and I've been doing a lot of calls with people. I really get to connect with educators across the US. And I get to learn about, how they're responding to these challenges. And so I think it's valuable to take some of that experience, right? We know that we were dealing with an uncertain time this spring, and we can look at these are two examples from two of our customers. that you can take a look at and read, and how they were kind of responding to a changing scenario this spring. They didn't really know what was going to happen, and they just started making moves. So this first one is about how they responded very, very quickly to a distance learning need, got devices, got hotspots out to kids, and distributed that through their free and reduced lunch and breakfast pathways. So inspiring stuff to see a district quickly responding. Another quote that I really liked was from a superintendent in Ohio, and they were talking about how they're preparing different teams within their district. And so they are kind of coming at this like telling facilities people, the building people, everyone's coming back, be ready for that. How are we going to handle it? And for the tech people, the challenge is when people are remote. So assume everyone's going to be remote, and let's prepare for that. I just find this is a great resource to learn from. Fellow educators are really good people to learn from. And I think both of these leaders were people I've gotten to talk to, and I think that's something that we can carry forward in this discussion. So another favorite quote of mine is worry about everything and panic about nothing. So carrying that forward, let's think about what next school year is going to look like. And really, I know this has become kind of a controversial topic within the US, but just with uncertainty, what we can say for sure is there's a range of possible scenarios, right? So one is business as usual, right? So whenever your schools start in the fall, 100% of kids come back, they're going about all their schoolwork, they're in all their regular classes, rosters don't really change significantly. I think within that context, though, it is good to acknowledge there are still times when students are not in school, right? So even before COVID, before any quarantine, there's reasons where students are absent, whether it's chronically ill students, students with different difficulties with getting to school. There are still students who are in a learning environment that's not in class. So even in the business as usual context, I think that's good to know. Now, something that they're saying, I've heard in some states, is that some groups of students or students in very at-risk populations could be held home. So maybe 10% of students, right? 50-50. California, where I am, is talking about doing this, where they're basically rotating. You know, half of kids are in school for 10-day period, then they go home to reduce the risk of reinfecting, and then it's 10 days on, 10 days off. So half the kids in school, half at home. And I put a very sad face next to this because it would mean my hair gets even worse, would be continuing quarantine and distance learning. So I don't think we need to dive into which one of these we think is going to happen. We don't really know. But the reality of that is, I think blended learning is something that we should all be considering. Because even in the business as usual case, you have some students that are going to be away. They're going to be online, right? So I think that is an important context for us to understand going into the next school year. So part of that learning is, all of this is along a learning path, but part of it is either online and part of it's away from home. Now that traditionally has been in school. But if this is the reality, what do our assessment tools need to do? And I think you can sit with that for a few seconds before I switch to the next slide. But I think maybe think to yourself for a second, what changes in that environment? It's a really interesting question. So what I want you guys to walk away from this with, like I said, I've been talking to a lot of educators, and I work on a lot of educational tools. So I want to help you think about what are the right questions to be asking. And I'll send all the questions that I have in this slideshow. You don't need to be frantically writing things down. We'll send this out to people. But really those questions starts with, are your assessment tools ready for blended learning, right? If you think about my 4 scenarios that I had on that previous slide, do they work in all those scenarios? And how do you even compare them for blended learning? So I want to acknowledge that you all are here today and you're watching this now, because June is a much better time to think about this stuff than September, when students are coming back. So today, security and equity are the things that I'll be focused on, and we need those to get the reliable assessment data we need. So security, I will break this down into a few dimensions here. And what I'll basically do is, for each dimension, I'll give you some questions that you should be asking an assessment tool provider. And then from there, we'll look at kind of what's an example of this. And I'll share some examples in EdSite, and I'll try to be pretty honest about what the limitations are with our tool, because I mean, you want to be asking these questions and you want to be understanding what you can get out of a tool. So flexibility is the first piece of this. And this is something that's come up a lot with distance learning. If you are a tech person in a school and you tried to set up laptops or devices at home for people, you know that flexibility can be a huge issue. Sometimes students are using non-school devices, all this stuff. So let's get into it. So my set of questions that I would ask someone would be here. It's really basic. It's just devices, browsers, and other platforms. So for example, EdSite integrates with Clever, Google Classroom, Office 365, all of these things. That would be educational tools and platforms in my mind. Google Classroom is very widely used this spring, and so I think that's a very important integration to check for when you're evaluating a tool. The final question is really the meat of it, though, right? So I think a lot of assessment tools out there will have 3 recommended browsers and lists of devices that they work on. And then the security features, so maybe it's a lockdown browser, maybe it's a live video tool, is not playing well with all of the different environments that it's needing to go into with distance learning. So that last question is really the meat of this, right? You don't just want a platform that says it works on a lot of these things, and then the security features, don't work on all the browsers that you want them to. So let's look at some of those features in EdSite that we built that are flexible, in the sense that they'll work on any browser that you're using, they'll work on any device that you're using. The first thing we did is we built a focus tracker. So what this is pretty explained by that red box. As a student is working, the teacher is going to get this report of when the student might move away from the assignment. Now, sometimes it's, to check a text message from a friend. Sometimes it's to go look up an answer in another tab. And so this is telling you when students leave the assignment, and can start a conversation of, oh, you left for half an hour and then came back with a fully written 5-paragraph essay. Interesting. So this is a good security feature on an exam, whether students are in class or not. In class, you can walk around and check their screens, make sure they're doing that. If they're at home, this focus tracker gives you an alert when students are not on track. Another one that's pretty commonly used across all platforms within EdSite, and this is cool because you can see a bit of a GIF of it in the background, is the live progress dashboard. So this fills up as students are working through an assignment, and you can use this to monitor what questions students are on, and it obviously goes hand in hand with the tool I just showed you for the student focus tracker. Something we're really, really excited about that we just launched this week, and I'll definitely come back to this later in the presentation, but we were trying at the start of distance learning to build all these different integrations with Zoom, integrate with Google Meet, all these tools that we know teachers are using. And we had this moment where we realized no matter what we're integrating with, it's one specific platform, and it's not going to work for everybody. So we took a step back and we said, can we build a little video platform within EdSite? And so we did. We built it around assignments, and it allows a teacher to talk to a group of kids or a single student, and it's around the assignment that they're working on. So you could basically give them help during the assignment. You can have a one-on-one with the student, And the beautiful thing is, because this is based within EdSite, it's not Zoom, it's not Google Meet, it's not some other third-party program. Any computer, any device that works with EdSite will work with this. So it's a really, really powerful tool. Now, it's in beta right now, and I want to be very transparent. Like I said, going back to my questions, right? Currently, it does not work on Safari. It works on Firefox and Chrome. So that's an improvement that we're looking to make this summer. But that is a much more flexible tool because it will work in any of those browsers that you're already using. So Safari's coming soon, but currently works in Chrome and Firefox. And you can launch this within EdSite, so you don't need to download a bunch of other stuff in order to launch the video call. I'll come back to this more when I talk about equity and a few other topics in here. So why does flexibility help? Why does this matter? I find you got to bring it back to, what does a district or a school do with this? So this is actually a really interesting case. This is well, that's not great writing, 2,000 of students. There are 2,000 students at the school. And it's a school that's actually an international customer of ours. And they came to us during distance learning, and they wanted to give their finals using this. And so part of the challenge of them being in the middle of distance learning is that students already were at home with their own devices. And so you can't do this pushing out of apps or anything like that a school admin normally would. So what this school did is they implemented the focus tracker, the live progress, and the real-time connect. So they used the real-time connect to basically proctor students while they were working and answer questions if they had them. And then they used the focus tracker to just make sure for each student, were they on target? How much time did they spend off the assignment? So that provided them some ability to analyze after the fact if they did suspect cheating and figure out what was going on. So flexibility matters for them, right? Because their tech person couldn't be in everyone's house. They had to push something out that's just going to work on a bunch of different devices. So flexibility really helped them out. Good. So security, another big just kind of box to check if you're looking for a secure assessment tool when students are at distance or in a blended learning environment is lockdown capabilities. So you might hear this called secure browser, you might hear it called lockdown browser. This is good for the more summative exams that you have when you want to just make sure, right? The focus tracker is telling if a kid clicks off the tab, this is going to make sure they can't do that. So our lockdown browser, actually, we'll start with the questions to ask because I think that's important. So does your tool have the capability? I alluded to this earlier. Can it be mass installed and pushed out to a bunch of student devices at once? Did you build your own solution or partner with another company? That's an interesting question to ask. And what devices does your browser work on? So flexibility always comes up. But I think these are good questions to be thinking about now. Keep those in mind. Does it work with your video proctoring tool? Another flexibility question. Before I get into this, the way it works for EdSite is basically when a student launches the assignment, I won't demo this now because it would literally lock me out of my presentation and go to meeting. But it launches a secure browser where they can only do the EdSite assignment. That's their only tab. They can't open new tabs. It won't close until they submit the assignment. Okay. So of these questions, I do want to just emphasize this third one here. So we partnered with another company, and we did this because we wanted to maintain flexibility. Right? So this company has expertise. They're called Respondus in building secure browsers. And part of the reason we chose to partner with them is that they deliver that secure browser app for Chromebooks, for iPads, and then for regular devices, right? So a laptop, Microsoft PC, that kind of thing. and they build a version for each one. So it's going to work in the device that our customers are using. That was really important to us. A lot of times if someone builds their own, it's going to be something that works in a very limited set of cases and is not very easy to set up. So the mass installation and the flexibility are going to come oftentimes from partnering with a partner on that. Okay, so why is that a useful tool for people? I'll go back to another customer of ours that's it's a fairly large district, and they have basically their teachers are giving formative assessments in the classroom using EdSite schools. And the district is giving unit tests, which are more summative on EdSite schools. So they're using the lockdown browser for the older students. I think they start at grade 7. Some people start with grade 8, where students are more likely to be trying to figure out ways to cheat a little bit. And so one thing it does prevents plagiarism from web sources because they're not going to other tabs. It also prevents them from contacting each other. So that's a positive because it makes it a little harder. Now, it's good to note, and if someone tells you, right, that their lockdown browser prevents 100% of cheating, we know that we live in a society where kids have phones now. So we are locking down their computer, kids still have phones. And again, that's where the real-time connect can be a valuable tool because you're actually seeing the student. But it is a powerful tool for making it very difficult for students to use their device to look up other information. So they're really just using the secure browser and using that to ensure that students are not cheating off of each other. One other thing, access windows, which I'll get into later in the pre-test access section. Next, so a third security piece that I've already touched on a bit is live video tools. So there is a limit to how well you can proctor someone just looking at, a report of what they're doing or looking at the focus tracker. There is something to be said for seeing on camera your students and what they're doing. So I think that's an important thing to look for with any assessment provider's security. Do they provide a live video tool? And once you're looking at that, if the answer is yes, which it should be at this point for blended learning, how do students ask questions or get help from the teacher, right? It shouldn't just be a teacher staring at students and they're getting nothing back. They should have a pathway to ask a question. If a teacher's going to be proctoring it, they might as well. Can students see each other on this tool? This is, again, we worked on some things with Zoom and found a lot of frustration across the board with teachers who were having difficulty, controlling 20 students when 3 of them are looking at each other on Zoom and doing all these inside jokes back and forth, right? We've all had that issue in class, and digitally, I'm sure it is much harder to handle. So in our tool, students don't see each other. They only see the teacher. Another decision about this is how does the tool work with lower bandwidth? Because in blended learning, many kids may be at home, so they may not have the bandwidth that they have at school. So the question to ask your assessment provider is, how will this work? What's the minimum bandwidth for this to be a functional tool? We decided to lower our video quality slightly from what you see on Zoom to support better, well, not better, but lower bandwidth connections for students. And I keep beating a dead horse with this one. I mentioned already it's not compatible with Safari at this point, but that's something we're working on. But it works with Chrome and Firefox. So asking about, does this work on all devices and browsers, is a very important question. So let's get a little more into this functionality here. So just some quick things to highlight. You can, it's a little hard to see these tools on this slide where my mouse is, but you can launch a video call, you can mute students, and you can you can actually, all the controls with Zoom where you kick them out of the call or move them in or out. When you launch that call with individual kids, you get a one-on-one view. You can chat with the student as well via typing. And what we're working on for this summer is that you'll also be able to see the student's work. So all of that is to say, it's kind of like going up to a student and taking a knee next to them at their desk and helping them out with their individual problem that they're working on. And here's that bigger screen video call with the student. So you actually do get a higher quality video, and it's better when you're in the one-on-one with the student. Oops. Why does this matter? So I'm not going to go into a use case, even though, well, we talked about that one school that already used this, which is awesome. It's great for them to use it after we launched it about a week ago. But to me, as a former teacher, why it matters is I think teachers are absolutely essential, and we need to give them better tools to do what they do if kids are not in the classroom. So like, I think one of my favorite parts about teaching high school math was, working with a small group of kids or an individual kid and seeing them learn something. We're trying to do that here by making this around an assignment and giving teachers the tools to still have those personal interactions and feedback in the moment. It's also a good proctoring tool, but we'll look at this one more time in this presentation as a tool for equity as well, with a lens on special education. But that's live video. Some other more standardized security features that you probably will see on a lot of assessment platforms, but it's good to ask about, is randomization. So if all students are taking the exact same test, it becomes more tempting for them to cheat off each other. So the question would be, can you randomize the order of questions? Now, this isn't always a good idea, right? If you're doing ELA and you have passages, you don't want to necessarily do that. But with math, it's a great practice. It mixes up the order. So if I'm texting my friend about what question one's answer is, they're seeing a different question one. Answers, so within a multiple choice or within another question type where the answers are laid out, can we even randomize the choices so that even if we see the same question one, my A is different than your A? That's an option in EdSite for both. And another one for math that's pretty cool is you can use random variables to actually make it so that two students see a different problem. And you can specify the answer algebraically so that it's truly different numbers that they're working with. So the students have to know the skill to solve it. And another one, sorry, clearly I'm a high school math teacher here, I guess, because I'm talking about all these math features, but you can set answers as algebraic expressions, which is a flexible way to set it up and more open-ended, so there's not just one answer. Yep, there's my randomized question order. I won't talk too much about that. I'll come back to why it matters after this section here. So the last piece I'll talk about is pre and post test security. So pre is before the student sees it. How are you keeping it secure from the student? Post is after the student has taken it. How are you preventing them from communicating things to other students, right? So in high school, a big thing is, first period sees the test, fifth period sees it after lunch. Have they talked to each other or shared answers? And that becomes a bigger concern, I think, as students get older. So here are some questions around that that make a lot of sense. So some features that we have, we allow you to say students can only access the assignment in a certain window or to a specific date or time. So you could say, no one even sees this assignment and can open it until 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning. That ensures that no student is in there early and sharing answers with each other. post-test, right, we want to make sure that students are all finishing at a similar time and no one has it open and is continuing to like get answers from students who may have finished. So you can set a time limit and say, starts at 9 a.m., you have an hour, so we know that at 10 a.m., all students will be done. And that works very well for the blended case, right? Because you can start it at your start time of class and just tell your student who's at home to start working on it. And even if they're texting with kids in class, those kids in class are going to be working on the same timeline. So another cool feature, and this is actually a more formative setting. I wouldn't do this in a summative setting, but EdSite has solutions. So you can add to the student report a video explaining how to do things on the formative side. On the more summative side, you can also choose to hide all the answers. Now that wouldn't be a very interesting screenshot here, so this is better, but you can hide them. And what that'll do is it means that if I finish and I'm in period 1, I can't share my answers. I don't know if they were correct or not because I'm not getting any score back. And you can change that later when you want to discuss and give feedback to kids. So that's something that you can change as time goes on. So how do we use kind of this universe? This is another customer we have in Massachusetts, and what they do, so this is what they were doing last year. So business as usual scenario with basically all their kids in school. And they're using the access codes and access windows to ensure that kids are only getting in when they're with a teacher and in the proper time. They're using the timer. They're using the question order randomized and hiding answer details, at least for the first week, so that absent students and students who are straggling to take the test can't be getting answer details from each other. And that's really helped them with cutting down on cheating in middle school and high school and has led to growth for those students. So that's this is a good set of features, even if students are all in classes. So security and equity, I didn't just pick them because they both end in ITY. I picked them because I think they're really important to ensuring that you get good assessment results from people, from students, and teachers can then use those assessment results to actually help students. So security, it has to be the right assessment for the right student in the right place. And that right place is changing a bit now, but that's okay. Equity means that students are given or using the appropriate tools and supports to take that assessment. Pretty simple, right? Like we just want them to be able to show what they know on the assessment. And so this breaks down in a few ways. Before I get into those, I think it's important to think about how equity works in a school building and who is helping to support equity in a school building. And that kind of helps us think about it as we go into it for blended learning. So I think a couple rules that come to mind for me when I think of equity is special ed teachers are very, very helpful. When I taught geometry, I had a special education teacher who was supporting 5 or 6 students in my class on any given day. And it was amazing to have him there. I also think of administrators, I think of teachers' aides, I think of people who are helping out in the classroom and trying to be part of that ecosystem and helping students. So what does that look like when we go to an environment where students are no longer in school? It's very challenging because those same people have to connect with those students, or we have to find a way to meet the students where they're at when they're doing the assessment. So that was a long-winded way of introducing this, but I think for equity, 3 ways you can kind of look at it. The first one is content readiness. So this goes back to the achievement gap and the summer slide piece that I was talking about coming out of this school year. There's going to be content readiness difficulties. So we got to think about how do we create more equity in that sense. Another is automatic supports for students who need them. So even if that special ed teacher can't drive to everyone's house, what tools can we give to that teacher and to those students to help them? And I'll close out with, you know, the most important thing for equity in my mind, which is letting teachers do their thing. I think teachers are one of the most powerful tools we have in fighting a lack of equity. So what questions can we ask? So how can we add content that supports students with content readiness issues and learning gaps? Can you set accommodations and modifications at the student level so that it doesn't have to be reset each time? Does your tool provide a way for students to ask for teacher help via live video call and an assessment? So let's jump into content readiness. A couple ways that this is done on EdSite that we've already seen this spring is adding videos that explain a topic or a skill. That could be in the assignment itself. So you could even ask students, like I used to flip my geometry classroom, and I would have students watch a video at home and come in and have to answer a few quick questions about the video. Very low depth of knowledge questions that were meant more to make them feel successful and check basic understanding on the video. But you can do that with EdSite. You can embed videos, you can embed the second piece here, teacher recorded audio. So you could record yourself either reading the passage or explaining something and put that embedded within the assessment. You can also make copies of assessments for students who may have different requirements. So you could level the passage, you could add definitions to things and send that second version individually to people. After the test, you can add solutions, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And then you can just give students more of that feedback where they can practice individually or independently and enrich what they're doing. I won't touch on that much today because it comes from EdSite's reports, but I will just mention it. So you can send, this is off that individual practice, you can send to an individual student, or you can create a group of kids in a report and send to them directly. So this makes it really easy to enrich what they're doing and make sure that they are able to get more practice. Adding video, it's very simple to embed from YouTube. And you could embed this one's embedded in the question. So it's kind of like an introduction to new material. You could also embed it in the solution, which would be more like a review for the student. Here's how our record audio tool works, where you as a teacher can basically record it. We also have a record audio question type for students, so they can record their answer as well. Awesome. We got content readiness for solutions and retakes. And this is, ooh, cool video. Julia, should I play this video?
So this video is really, it's Dave Limbaugh. It's like 35 seconds of him talking about how he used to give students the chance to take it over and over again. It's not only the retake, but it's a cool thing to talk about if you want to do it really formative.
We have 10 common assessments throughout the entire year. When a student takes a common assessment in EdSite, they get their immediate data, and then the next day they get an option to improve their score because I simply copy the assessment, change out half the questions, and allow them to work at their own pace, at their own time, in their own location to improve their knowledge base by constantly just going through the material.
Yeah, and ISO would have been that kid that would redo it over and over and over again until I got like a perfect score.
I let him do it as many times as necessary to get the best possible score.
Awesome. And there's Julia.
Yeah.
So that is a really cool, that's Dave Limbaugh. He's one of our EdSite experts, and he's a wonderful teacher in Ohio. And that's just an example of how you can use, use your data and allow kids to retake and get additional practice if they want to. It's cool that he's also giving them new material to practice with. So I think a really key part of equity here in the blended learning environment that I touched on before is if students are at home, we physically can't be everywhere. So it's really important that we have good tools to support them. And a reminder that it's not to stress people out, it's not to, but it's a good reminder that an IEP and a 504 plan should be followed for every assessment that matches the criteria for that, every single one. And that's literally a legal thing. So I think there is a lot of weight behind this, and it's something that we should care about this just as people, and we also should care about this from a legal perspective. So it's very important that we're meeting this need. And many districts actually had to stay pencil and paper because they couldn't equitably get resources to people like that. So it's really important that we're able to give these modifications to students at distance and meet their needs. It's literally the law. So these are some examples of things that you can give to an assignment. So earlier I was talking about you can make a copy of an assignment and add these settings to it. With EdSite schools, something that we're really excited about doing is you can really live up to that, what the law is, by at the start of the year creating student groups or giving individual students modifications that travel with them everywhere. So if I get text to speech because I have an issue with reading, my science teacher, my ELA teacher, my math teacher could all modify all of their assessments, or an administrator could just set this up at the start of the year, and then I'm going to get that text to speech in every test that I do. Something we're working on this fall is the ability to make this even more dependent on subject, right? Because some IEPs say that you get text to speech for math, but not for the passage for ELA. So that's even something that we have in progress here, and an example of how detailed we want this to be. But the really cool thing is teachers don't have to do extra work because the settings are going to travel with the student. So I think that's a really good reason to go back to this question here, this second question, because even if since it's the legal requirement, you're going to end up spending a lot of time duplicating stuff and modifying it to fit those needs. And if you have an automated way to do it, it's going to save you a massive amount of time, and you can focus that time on better supporting those students in other ways. Sorry for the quick jump back. Here we go. So here's just an example of what it looks like in Ohio. So our Ohio assessment viewer, this is what the Ohio State text-to-speech looks like. So we've aligned to that. This summer, we're releasing text-to-speech that's going to match whatever your state-to-state viewer is. So you can highlight the text, you can have it speak for you. It will speak in that kind of, like Siri kind of robot voice, but it reads out everything well. And that is very, very helpful for many students, whether it's English language learners, younger students, or just students with that on their IEP or 504 plan. And I think my main message, if I want to close out with one thing here, we're talking a lot about evaluating tools. And it's important that you guys know how to evaluate tools and that you are able to make the right choice, because at the end of the day, that is going to impact your students and it's going to impact your teachers that you work with. But all of that is not to say that tools are replacing teachers. In our view at EdSite, the most important thing that we can do is empower teachers. And we know that teachers are essential. So this new feature of real-time connect, and generally just the fact that we have a free product that we believe is very robust for teachers, it comes from this belief that we have that teachers are the ones who are going to figure out how education works moving forward in this uncertain time. And we just want to give them really good tools to, be able to figure out what that looks like. And so I wrote down some applications of where I feel the real-time connect could be a valuable piece for teams that are trying to be equitable in their assessment. But my last bullet point is really like, what I'm most excited to see is when you create a tool like this, it's the people in the classroom, the people that are in there every day that are going to find the most interesting ways to use it. So I can list out a bunch of ideas I have, but I'm just really excited to see what teachers, what SPED teachers all over the country and world are doing with this tool. So yeah, I think you can use this. There's ideas I have, and you can read them, but I'm very excited to see what more we can find. So thank you guys. That concludes my many slides here. I appreciate your patience for sticking with it. And I guess we'll pause now and see if there are any questions that people have.
I will say, Brian, you answered some questions that came into the chat in the later slides, so it was perfect. So it really backed up the chat responses. But if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we can answer them.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that it is free. Is that the basic plan version, so-called, or is the Cadillac plan that you have available free as well?
So that's an excellent question. So there is a free version for an individual teacher and your students. And then we have a paid version for schools and districts. So the free version is going to have pretty much everything that you as a teacher individually are going to want. So it'll have all our content on there. You're able to search by standard. You will see reports by standard, by question. You'll be able to grade. You'll be able to do all of that stuff. With our school and district version, we've added we try to break it down along features that, are useful for teams, right? So you'll have a folder system. You'll have the ability to share content privately as a team. You're able to push out assignments across multiple teachers' classes if you're, say, a department head or administrator. And you will get some additional, more in-depth reporting. A couple other things that come with the premium version are a viewer. So our default assessment viewer it's good. Students can navigate it. They move between questions, all that regular stuff that you see on the state test. Our premium assessment viewers look exactly like your state tests. So if you're, in California and doing the SBAC, we have an SBAC viewer. If you're taking the MCAS in Massachusetts, we have an MCAS viewer. So it gives students like a little bit more familiarity with what the state test looks like. But you could give that same assessment on free EdSite and get data back, all that good stuff. Students are still practicing a digital assessment. It just won't look and feel exactly like the state test for your state.
The other big ones that I might say are important to note when looking at EdSite versus EdSite Schools, EdSite being the free teacher version, EdSite Schools, the premium school and district version, is that lockdown browser that Brian was talking about. So that ability to, make sure that students can't open other tabs. That's part of the premium version. The free version would be that focus tracker that you would be using instead that tells you if students leave, but it doesn't lock it down. So, from a security perspective, that would be one difference. And then from an accommodations perspective, text to speech being built in to the platform. So everything has text to speech. That's part of the EdSite Schools version. There is a capability for teachers to record their own voices reading things. That's a bit more of an effort on the teacher's part. So it's possible on the free side to do your recordings, but with the EdSite Schools version, all that text to speech is built in. And as Brian mentioned, you can set it to follow students to all of their content. And then the last thing would really be around reports. The amount of data that you get as an administrator, as a teacher, is a lot more on EdSite Schools. I mean, as an admin, you only get data if you have EdSite Schools.
Yeah, thank you. Good call.
Great question. And just to say on that question, it's important to us as a company that the free platform is robust and it is powerful and it is empowering teachers. And it's important to us that the paid school and district version is accessible and affordable for teams. So it's all in line with our mission of, we want to help have a positive impact on kids.
Secondly, as a teacher in Ohio, did I hear you correctly that the question format is aligned, in the basic plan, the teacher free plan is aligned to Ohio's air test modalities?
The free,
So,
I can show you a free one really quickly. It's might as well. So the free one it's not exactly aligned to Ohio, but what you'll see is that a lot of the tools are very similar. So let's just look at the Great Depression. So this is our free viewer. Now, for a student, it won't have all this customized. This is only for a teacher, this gray bar. But for a student, it does look, so you'll have the navigation between questions. You can see the questions up here. You have a lot of the same tools, but they're not going to be exactly the same as what Ohio's state test looks like. There's some modifications with, but all the same functions you should be able to do, but it's just not going to align exactly to the look and feel.
One question in the chat is around Google Classroom. With Google Classroom, you can push your assignments to Google Classroom. You can have your Google Classrooms brought into EdSite for your rostering. Students can do their single sign-on with Google, and you can do the gradebook, Google Classroom gradebook pushback. So you can push EdSite grades into Google Classroom.
Yeah, that's a big one for Ohio people too. I know a lot of people there are using Progress Book, and now you can go from Google Classroom to Progress Book, and so effectively you can go from EdSite to Progress Book.
Yeah, Brian. The other thing we could show the teacher from Ohio is we could show them the Ohio Common Assessments Initiative.
Yes.
So as Brian was saying, like our regular EdSite viewer does have the question types that are aligned to those tech enhanced items students need to know how to navigate. And then with the EdSite Schools version, you've got the more premium aligned look and feel. But we do an initiative each year so you can see what our air aligned viewer looks like. And so you can check out that initiative each spring. It's the recently released air tests digitized on EdSite. And and everyone can give them in that air viewer. But if you want to be able to give your summative assessments and your exit tickets, and you just want to normalize that viewer across all of your content, this is what that Ohio aligned viewer looks like. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Another question in terms of compatibility with a learning management system, EdSite with Canvas, what compatibility?
Yeah, so we do a roster import. So you can do roster import with from Canvas. You can, it's similar to Google Classroom, actually. So what Julia just said with Google Classroom, where you can do rostering, and then you can send assignments to a Canvas class. And then from there, you can actually push to Canvas Gradebook.
Okay.
And that's part of the EdSite schools version, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we need, in order for Canvas integration to work currently, we need to work with your Canvas admin and get their key so that we can set up the integration. So that's how that works currently. So it's part of our, it has to be as a school or district.
Oh, okay.
The integrations for us, so Google is an exception because they make it really easy to do, but a lot of the integrations, so like our secure browser and Canvas, these require a pretty big investment on our end in order to either do the integration or just to work with them. And so those typically go into part of our premium platform because that's where those requests are coming from.
Great to see one of the comments in the chat. Someone tried out the real-time connect with their students and had a positive experience. So yay. Definitely, Candace, if you get a chance to send us an email, we'd love to, correspond with you more about your experience and your feedback. Thanks. All right. Well, Brian, do you have anything else you want to chat about?
I will leave us on the note of teachers are essential. I think that's a great place to close this out. Thank you, everybody, for attending and spending your time learning about this. Feel free to shoot us any questions at schools@edsite.com. And thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.